Hello, everybody. Welcome to the first of our fall 2018 artwork series. It's my great pleasure to introduce to you Pamelia Stickney, a renowned composer, performer, all-around musician, with a biography that's much too impressive to encapsulate in anything like a satisfactory way. So here are just a few sketches. She was born in Los Angeles, began her performing life as a jazz and rock musician, playing the upright bass at the age of 18. But sometime during these impressionable years, she saw a 1993 documentary film entitled Theremin, an electronic Odyssey, which introduced her to a truly unique instrument that has become her signature and trademark. And a few words about the theremin. It was invented in the 1920s and patented then later in 1928 by a young Russian physicist known under the westernized name of Leon Theremin, who was doing Soviet-sponsored research into proximity sensors. The instrument, which you can see here, has a controlling section that typically consists of two metal antennas that sense the position of the thereminist's hands, who controls frequency or pitch with one hand, amplitude or volume with the other. The electronic signals are then sent to the amplifier and sound to loudspeakers. So far, nothing remarkable, except for this. The theremin is the only musical instrument, at least to my limited knowledge, that is played without physical contact.
Yeah, that's true, I think,
What?
So far.
Yeah. So the theremin has been used in many ways, including in iconic film scores by Bernard Herrmann, Miklos Rozsa. It inspired Robert Moog, by his own account, to create his groundbreaking synthesizer in the 1960s. A version of it was included in the Beach Boys' Good Vibrations, the big hit of 1966. More importantly, our guest today, Pamelia, has adopted and expanded the theremin's capacities in truly amazing, innovative, experimental ways. With her strong background as a jazz bass player, for instance, she's developed a walking bass theremin technique. You can catch a bit of it on her TED Talk on YouTube, unless we can coax her into a little demonstration of that today. In addition to her solo work here and abroad, she's also collaborated with artists such as David Byrne, Yoko Ono, Bela Fleck, among many others. She's appeared on Saturday Night Live, and she is finishing up a residency here at the Stone at the new school curated by John Zorn. And there she goes. So without further ado,
I just felt like
walking bass theremin virtuoso Pamelia Stickney.
It's like the beginning of a show, and it's like, and then at first it's like you're describing, and the instruments controlled this, and I felt like I was a flight attendant, like giving the demonstration, like, and then the mask is going to come down, and it would.
That makes it sound absolutely ordinary, and then say, but it's not at all. There's nothing that is watched.
And it makes you go crazy if you play this thing. It's like a totally neurotic instrument because I'm such a control freak, and this instrument is so not about, it's about kind of like relatively having control, but still there's no sense of consistency with it, so that drives me crazy. And what I mean by that is, you have to tune this thing up to your body and your surroundings, and people ask, why are you so still when you play? And it's because if my body is moving, it's affecting the pitch, and I don't have as much control if other parts of my body are moving when I'm trying to control playing a melody. So it has the capacity to sound very vocal, and people ask, how did you find a theremin? And back in the day, in the late 90s, when I saw that documentary, I was able to buy one by mail order from Bob Moog's company. I'm sure you know of Bob Moog, who was the famous synthesizer maker. Anyways, you're all familiar with this instrument or not? Because I'm curious, if they're first timers, and you're welcome also to raise your hand. If I'm mentioning something that's you're just I don't even know what she's talking about, because I don't want to sound like going to the plumber, doing tech talk, and it's I have no idea what you're talking about with these connecting pieces, and just fix my sink. I don't want to sound like I'm going over anyone's heads or being cocky or something. The instrument's kind of like a voice. You can only play one voice at a time. So You know, it's not like going onto a keyboard where you have polyphony. But people ask, you know, well, how did you get into looping with it? And it was because I had this gig that came up that paid not so well. And I thought, you know, I don't want to, you know, like pay the other musicians so badly. And how am I going to pull this gig off? Because it would be really cool to do. And that's when I thought, maybe I'll try looping with this instrument so I could build it into something that can sound like many voices together. So I'll give you an example of what I mean by building a loop with it. And when I was first starting out with it, I would just use one looping pedal, and I didn't know very much about using pedals and things. That was something that I hadn't explored before, because I was always playing bass before I came to the theremin. I was playing piano, and I really missed polyphony to be able to play many notes. And so this is kind of my way of compensating for you know, trying to give myself the feeling of having a string section. And that's sort of how the adventure began, to start working, you know, with pedals to see what can I build from this, and how can I, you know, make more things happen with this very primitive setup of at first one looping pedal. And I started incorporating other things, like if I run this loop through a harmonizer, I'll turn it up so you can hear it better. You can hear that it gets thicker, and that's just having something following along in a minor third above. I can also change. So it's kind of like this instant gratification way of experimenting around, as if you have a bunch of string players with you, and instead of telling them like, hey, could you like divide up and like some of you over there transpose your part while you're reading it up a minor third, and you over there like transpose your part down to a fourth. Like, you know, it's like it would take a lot of time to write all of this stuff down, and then to find people who are willing to sit there in the living room with you while you're trying to direct them to do all of these things. It's a real time-consuming effort. So I spent a lot of time like alone with all the pedals, like, and just noodling and fiddling around with like what's possible with this. And what I'll do is maybe I'll play an excerpt of one of the primitive pieces that's using just one looping pedal before I got into exploring all of the different ways of going about it. It is right here. And what's kind of cool is you can do very subtle things like slowly add notes to it. And I'll fast forward so you can hear you hear a high pitch up above. And there are things that start to creep in single notes, and this piece progresses over a long chunk of time. I'll fast forward and you can hear how it's all happening one note at a time. Something new gets introduced. A bass starts to come in. hear the voice coming. You can hear the pitch fighting with itself, a warbling wah-wah, and a at the top. And I'll fast forward a little so you can hear how it starts to grow. So it sounds like strings, really. And so a lot of the things I was exploring was putting microtonal pitches next to each other and thinking of like, how can you make this effect that sounds like glass or something metallic or like a very slow motion cymbal, and someone's like scratching the surface of a cymbal and you hear these other pitches coming out. And so this is a very slow, long moving gestural kind of piece. So I've always been very fascinated by harmony since I guess like I could remember it, hearing first what was on the radio, like, oh wow, that's such a pretty song. And so I didn't know what things were called, like chord changes or things, but there would be certain things I would hear, and there's like, you can have a really emotional feeling when you hear certain harmonies or certain combinations of harmonies. And there's some songs you hear where you get some sort of feeling from it. And so I've always been fascinated with the different feelings of harmony and how to incorporate that in working with a monophonic instrument and the limitations, of having to work one note at a time. So I get sick of sometimes, just playing the theremin, and I often go back to listening and exploring composers whose works that I've heard that I'd be very moved by harmonically, by what I was hearing, and then I would obsess over them, and so there were some things that I'd heard, I remember when a friend first introduced me to Messiaen, like, who is that? Because I'm kind of from under a rock. Like, it wasn't until I moved to New York and all these cool people said, have you heard of this? Have you heard of that? And, do you ever remember the first times you've listened to something when you're much younger? And it's like, I don't get this. I first heard Bartók string quartets and I thought, I wouldn't pick those notes, or that's like an unusual sound, and like what a strange decision to make in a composition. And it took years of finally hearing things in a different way and also being exposed to many more different types of music and playing with different people who heard, oh, well, if you like this thing, have you checked out that? And so So I'll just like fast forward to when I had heard this one particular piece of Messiaen that's normally just for piano by itself, and when you hear a few bars of it, it's super thick. You can hear it's like really super thick chords, all these clashing half steps, and then this. And so it's like, I can't do that on a theremin. It's a one note at a time instrument. But then, when I was listening to the harmonies, it's like, it would be such great changes to solo over. But then also, to think of the idea of separating the harmonies that are inside the piano, and then, arranging it for a small group where there's violinist and vibraphone and piano. So the piano's parts, harmonies are then divided, because I felt like, I think if Messiaen had the time, he probably would have orchestrated a lot of these works. And so when you hear how this version is done, slowed it down, spread out some of the notes that would normally be crunched next to each other. And so, yeah, it was just I thought, I'm going to play like a bass next to the other instruments, but separate the harmonies between the instruments and bring out certain voices. So there are lots of things. If I heard that piece like when I was 18, I'd probably be kind of unsure about it. And like, wow, that's not at all like what I'm used to hearing. It's got so many very, very thick things happening. And then like when you look at that music, it's like, oh my God, like how in the world can someone sight read that? But do you have any questions so far? Because it's like, I hope people aren't like, what is she talking about? Like, she's totally like going on an acid trip on harmony, and it's like I can't help myself. Like, I hope I'm not becoming overindulgent and like, what is going on here? Well, I kind of feel like a lot of what I'm inspired by in my workings with my looping pedal setup when I am working alone on the theremin, it's because there's I've spent so much time listening and studying and so fascinated and obsessed with harmony and wanting so much to be able to find a way to make use of what I'm hearing. But then I can't just go in the studio and record multi-track like a whole bunch of individual voices. And so I've got to figure out a way to consolidate this like urge and need to work with harmony and make some really beautiful things happen with something that only has one voice at a time going on. And so there's some later explorations when I start working also adding a harmonizer into my setup. And so there was this performance I did that was in a church, and And you know, it was just a year ago, a really big, beautiful space. And I wanted to try to explore also, you know, kind of like thinking of like this church has got this full-on history in Vienna, the Karlskirche. It has like really strange symbolism, and it was the 500-year anniversary of the Reformation. And so there are these pieces that I titled, even though these are improvisations, working with the sound of the space, and I'll just play like little tiny excerpts so you can hear like what strange things happened. And when I fast forward, as it progresses to then going into where I start working with some distortions and triggers. There was a construction site happening in the church, or rafters and things. And this was like making this explosive rhythmically, and some people turned around, they thought like the rafters might be falling. So that was sort of like, you know, I started exploring, like, how can I get like a really orchestral kind of feeling and sound? How can I build something with very thick harmonies? And so I still continue with a passion to listen to a lot of pieces and works that, okay, I'm not going to be doing that on the theremin alone, but there's something inside there that I really need to grab at. And I don't know, do any of you like listen to Bartók or like, so, or you might know of like, he had these really beautiful books, the Microcosmos. And I have this theory that, you know, maybe he made these really nice study books for the study of when you first begin piano. Normally it's like these really boring, like, dun, 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 you know, and it's like, oh, that makes anyone want to quit piano lessons when you're a kid. It's like, I don't want to play that, you know, there's a song I want to really learn. And he made these very, you know, like unusual sounding pieces that you didn't have to be, you know, technically advanced to do, but that were so sophisticated and interesting, and you know, were exercising your fingers, but also I'm sure if, you know, the parents were musicians and their kids are practicing a little bit of Microcosmos in the house, it's like, oh, that's such a relief to hear. It's like, oh, there's some interesting things that come out. And so there's this piece that I'd heard of his, from his Microcosmos, and it totally sucked me in. And this is like him playing it. Get away, stupid ad. I hate that thing. So, you know, when I got acquainted with that piece, I was then starting to arrange it to do together with a pianist, where I would take the melody. But then I started to hear another idea, like, oh wow, like it'd be kind of cool to take, you know, Bartók's when understanding the harmony that's happening as the piece is going, and from that point that we just heard up to, it's like, ooh, this other idea kind of comes up, and I'm still kind of following his set of rules. And here it becomes something new. and here when the melody comes back in, and this is as written, except it's like, oh, well, it's kind of nice to then double it up with minor thirds on top, and it's this octatonic scale that I learned about from hearing Messiaen. It's like, oh, wow. And so then there were other ideas that started happening from like my bullshit attempts at like, oh, I love this certain poem of Scriabin, but there was this middle section where it's like you have to do like 9 beats with like the fingers on your right hand, and the left hand is like in another tempo signature, and it's like, this is impossible, but it's so beautiful, it's happening there. And so, but then I started to just like improvise because I so loved the harmonies of that section, and it kept playing over and over inside my head, that it then turned into a piece. So there's here's the section that I had a problem trying to execute that this guy does so beautifully. And hear this, if you listen to the harmonies of it. Oh, not yet. Okay, here we go. This is the weird, funky for your fingers to do part. So like I love like these really chromaticism things in Scriabin. He kind of starts to sound samey after a while. When you hear his stuff, he does kind of like the same licks, but I still love Scriabin. Like he's so romantic. And so after hearing that, and then trying to do that middle section, I then started to think and apply like, oh, and how would Bartók then treat, that middle section? And I think of how sometimes there would be these overlays in the harmony that you'd hear where it's like something is back here and the next part is here, and it's like it seems like they're in 2 different keys, but it'll come to a resolution. And so you'll hear like this is based on that midsection of that Scriabin poem, but then like I call it like kind of, what would Bartók do in this situation? And so this chord that comes in is exactly the same key as the Scriabin, that. And so you can hear how like there are very subtle movements that can happen that give you a very different tensions, and it's just like a half step can make such a very big difference in how something feels when you're listening very closely, and so that's always been something that I've totally nitpicked and gone totally insane over, and then I play an instrument that's already like such an insane piece of work thing that's But so I'm just giving examples of like the things I obsess over that are a very big influence on my approach to this instrument, because oftentimes people associate it with being an operatic voice maybe, or a sci-fi instrument that you hear in the old films, but it's I've also heard that someone had said that someone once asked him like, why didn't you use like Theremins really, and apparently or supposedly he said that, he just wasn't interested because people were only interested in playing the theremin to mimic other instruments, and so it was like not so interesting to him. But my argument really that was very different was I had no access to string instruments after I'd been out of school. And I was in the studio with this rock band, Gegita, and I'd had string arrangements. So we were trying to figure out who has a violin I could borrow, and a viola and a cello. And then there's the issue then of like getting the instruments lined up for me to like try to remember and get my technique up to par to play these certain parts. But then when I started playing the theremin, it's like, wait a minute, I can go direct. I could do those string parts and track them. So it's always serving a purpose for something that I want to do. I look at it as a tool, and sometimes people say, look what the theremin can do. And it's not what the theremin can do, it's like what the person behind it figures out to do with it. And so like people forget that people make music, and we just use all of these tools to try to accomplish the vision that we have in the long run with it. Are there any questions, like, or things that you're curious to want to see? Come up closer, like.
But I'm very curious about how you learned the choreography.
Oh, the choreography.
That's strange, because you have to.
Yeah, like the moving around of the fingers and getting around. Well, yeah, because people, they wonder, did you study a technique? And it was more, I was following my ears, and I always tell people when they're starting out, you don't have to worry about moving your fingers. At first, I played using my whole hand, moving my whole arm, and but that was, so difficult to land at an accurate place. And so I think that you eventually evolve your technique to then start exploring adding smaller muscle movements to be able to make fine adjustments to the pitch. So when you watch very closely, it looks like I'm holding a string, but I feel like since there's nothing you can touch or feel, the only reference point I have is to feel my own hand, or in my case, how I'm using my thumb here as a place for my fingers to land, so it stops in a place, and I'm not like warbling around in the air. And the right hand, I'm playing it left-handed too, by the way. Most of the time when you see this, you might see people playing it the other way. The volume control then is often forgotten about because you might worry and focus so much about nailing the pitches, but the volume is the way to really mask and give the illusion that you're separating the notes, because this thing, if I didn't bring the volume down, it would always have a sound going. It'll always be wailing, and I could climb. And that's because I'm not masking and giving silence in between with my volume hand. And so it's a very quick duck that I'm doing here. And what's strange is on this particular instrument, you're actually playing the silence. And so it's also another like tweak your brain in some strange way to, you're not striking or hitting anything, you can't feel anything. Sometimes people ask, do you feel waves or like energy or tingly or anything? Because you think maybe an electronic instrument, but you really feel nothing, and that's the very difficult part. Someone else have another question, like that you might be curious about? Because I'm not sure, if like, are there like theory nerds out there, or are there, people more curious about understanding, like, this is your chance to get like a free theremin lesson. I'm really expensive, I'll teach you anything about this instrument, so you can teach other people and charge them a lot of money, actually. What's your question?
I'm a composer, and I'm very inspired by this demonstration to compose for theremin.
Ah, yeah.
So when it comes to notating for theremin players, is there any standard? I don't even see the range of the instruments.
That's such a good question, because many composers are interested in writing for the instrument, and what's crazy is different models have different octave ranges. And then also, when you're approaching someone who's playing it, you got to find out what the range of their instrument is. So no two instruments have the same voice range, just like a singer. Some singers is like their lowest note is ah, and like their highest is like and so then you have to get to know who you're writing for, and what they're capable of, what they're able to get around with, and it's usually like writing for a vocalist, and so you can use the same, notation that you're accustomed to for writing for a voice, which is just like for writing any other instrument, but you have to take into account. You're not going to have lines that are, if you want accuracy in the lines, you're not always going to compose something that goes, oops, that's like, like this is like a one-stringed string instrument in some ways. So, you're not able to just keep your hand in one position and jump an octave. And a lot of people ask, well, how do you know what note you're finding? And I say it's just like being a singer, because when you get accustomed to training your ears, then when you're looking at the notes you have, it does help. How you have to do this for some singers, you need to be able to, you might have to write in the chord or another instrument's cue before the vocalist is coming in, so that they have a reference note before they start to sing. So you just kind of approach it as if you're working with a vocalist, and then also, no two players have their same way of getting around or techniques for getting around, because I get around very fast with certain types of lines, like, something that has like a, pentatonic-y kind of run to it, like, it looks like I'm just going like this, but it's an adjustment of, fourths, minor thirds, whole step. But and so I also think you think in intervals with this instrument, because you're working relatively as you're going around. So you know how like a fourth feels like. And also, if you do come across, like, there is a theremin, I think, on campus here. There must be one, the Etherwave model. Another thing to keep in mind is this instrument, it has about 8 octaves playable range without changing any settings. So that's like going super low sub notes that you fart, and all the way up to like high squeak. But the smaller boxes, they have like a 4.5 octave singable voice range. And it's more like a string instrument that it's logarithmic. So your lower notes will be wider apart, and then they get smaller. And so people ask sometimes, well, how do you tune the instrument, to have some sense of consistency? And what I advise is checking, how your whole steps, or, take an interval without paying attention to being exactly in tune with another instrument, but you just check it in every range. And that's how you kind of start to build some sense of consistency. But when you're first starting out too, you don't realize how much your body is moving and wobbling, like, and if you're in a music shop, I think that's why this instrument, wasn't taken up by a lot more people in the past. When you don't realize that it's not just affected by your own body, it's affected by the people walking around you through the shop. And so when someone just walks by, even at this long distance, like where the chalkboard is, that will affect your pitch. And it's the same thing as if you're trying to play a violin and someone is turning the knobs and changing the length of the string. So you will suddenly have to move a longer distance with your fingers to shoot for the notes that you normally could get moving just that much. So when you understand that, like, okay, you need to set the instrument in a way that you don't have this problem of it, well, like this. There's a whole step. That's really far to go, and it's not much range. And so, so you just have to adjust. What's written on the knob that says pitch is just for calibrating it. And when people ask, well, how do you tune it back and forth? Because it changes when my hand is here, and you just listen to it as you turn the knob. Oh, it's going up. I don't want it to go that direction. So you listen for it to go down, and then you test it out. I'm still not getting like a lower voice, so I'll just keep going. So it's when you don't understand these things, you can actually buy a theremin used for really cheap, because people, might not understand this. They tune it to the space of their bedroom, and then they go to bring it to a gig, and then there's a really big open stage, and you'll have this opposite problem of where it goes into reverse. So, like, you'll watch and hear this. There's your lowest note now in the middle of the air. And then you go this way, and it starts to go up. And people, like, sometimes they sell their theremin because they think it's broken. It's like, I'm gonna get rid of it. So you can get them really cheap. It's like, your theremin's broken. It's going backwards. But, I call this the 0 point, where there's no more beats in it. You could hear it beating, because it's a beat frequency oscillator. So when those beats are going faster and faster is when you start to hear a pitch come out, and then it's getting even faster and faster and faster, and that's what makes the higher notes gradually. So when you know that it's such a hard instrument to understand, that was, I think, part of the reasons why there weren't many more players a long time ago. And also, it has to be well built, because there are some where you only have the squeaky range, or it's really tiny space to get around, and you have like 3 octaves in this tiny space, and that's like not possible to really physically control, unless you're a sloth. I don't know. You have any other questions out there? Yeah.
A lot of what you've been playing is being built to upgrade.
Mm-hmm.
Demonstrate that at least in one.
Oh yeah, of course. Yeah. Here, I'll get it tuned up again. I'm like, oh no. Okay, so I've got a knob here that I can just flip to bring it down 1 or 2 octaves, so that I'm in that comfortable playing range you saw me in. That was like in this space. And what I do is I change the quality of the sound. I have a knob to... And I usually like this sound for when I'm in the low voice place. And if you watch my right hand, you'll see how I'm plucking it. And I'm controlling like the sustain of it, so it has this, it sounds as if it's resonating. And also people ask, how do you get the staccato? And I thought it's much more efficient with the right hand to move away from the antenna and use my thumb as a stopping place for these fingers. And so then you just control how slowly you want to open these fingers up to slowly bring down the sustain to silence. So you could then choose how long you want your note to hold that you're plucking. So it can have a bass function, but I was a bass player before, and it was just kind of this goofy thing where I was playing the theremin, and then one day on the cheapo small model, I had a whammy pedal, my boyfriend's whammy pedal, that knocks things down 2 octaves, and we had a bass amp around, and so I thought, hey, wait a minute, walking bass line, it's pretty linear. You don't have to do big octave jumps, and you can get always to the next changes by, just a whole step or a minor third or a fourth away, and you can land somewhere that makes sense. And so it really lent itself to doing it on the theremin, and it gave me less stuff to carry around, because then I started playing like the heads to melodies, like the singing vocal part, which is great for the instrument. And then the pianist would like add a couple of bars so I could change my sound settings as fast as possible, and like, okay, I'm gonna jump on the bass so he could take a solo. And you have other questions out there? Someone else had their hand raised. Yes.
Yeah, I'm kind of curious. Segues nicely from this. You've compared the instrument to string instruments and to voice.
Yeah.
But to get good at playing those instruments, whether voice or string instrument, you practice a certain repertoire, right?
Well,
So
yeah.
to get to be a good theremin player, what do you practice? What's the
Oh, well, I never really practice. It's more.
composer's dream instrument because there's
Well,
you have to improvise on it.
Well, how it works is like it's like one melody or line at a time that where I would hear something. It's like, oh, I'd really love to play that on the theremin. I really like that piece. And so then, to test out and see like, how can I make this happen? And so it's just like with any other instrument. The more different things you start playing, you start to realize that there are similar combinations that happen. And so then you start to develop, like in this case, a vocabulary of movements for your intervals. And suddenly, you have to think like, what's coming next? Like, how do I set myself up to get to the next place? There might be this really huge jump. And like, I'll show you an example, and you can see how my hands can have two different ways to go about it. Whoops. I'll bring it up high, so. So I went like this to make my fourth jump. And it could also be done so instead of shifting my whole hand up fourth to the, I went like this and opened my fingers. But that's more difficult because what comes next. So I normally in that case would rather move the whole hand. And going down is different than going up, but I wasn't thinking about what I was doing. It's just I was trying to figure out what was the most comfortable way to get around that was consistent. And so you have, it's just like if you're on a one-stringed instrument, let's say, and you could make the choice if you have to do a very, you go up a fourth and then you need to continue up further, then you try to think like, well, what's the easiest way to go about it so I'm setting my hand up to reach the things that are going to follow, and then also, how there's a note that's going to be taking me down much lower, and so how am I going to set myself up to get down to that place? But it's always a kind of like an exploration and problem solving, like how do I make that work? How do I get around? And usually, I've been doing this for so long now, I know that if I hear, a melody, I actually know what I would do with my fingers to get that. And people sometimes ask, like, how do you practice a way to always land your fingers in that place exactly so quickly? And I remembered watching some sort of martial arts class where the teacher took a stick. Everyone had to take this stick, swing it through the air, and make it land on this X on the floor. And that's really difficult to do with a stick that's like nearly as tall as I am, to do this very fast movement. And you had to do it very slowly. So every step of the way, your body then, can begin to build a muscle memory of all those intricate movements you make as you swing that stick to make it land on that X on the floor. And so, there might be a tendency to go over and over again, swinging it really fast, and you won't build that muscle memory by, overshooting it and guessing, maybe I should do it this way. Instead, you have to kind of do things slowly and stop yourself when you overshoot. But it depends how you want to approach the instrument, because I'm not like a strict type of thinker where you should only use this to do melodic things, to written notes. And it's open to being used in so many different ways. And I do like to explore it in what some people might call like, an atonal, completely microtonal, like, what the hell is that thing? Is that music? So ear training is super important if you're wanting to play like precise written things. And just like string players and vocalists, and also instrumentalists playing, instruments that you've got to be able to tune up to blend with the other people you're playing with, to understand when you're sharp or flat. And so I'll show you what it looks like that I see people often do. Like say like you want to reach a fourth again. Oh, that's too far. And it's like you'll never learn if you're just shooting and guessing and jumping at it. But the best way is to go very slowly and stop yourself when you land on the pitch that you intend to get to. So, and if you overshoot, try to stop it before you overshoot. And that's a very difficult thing when you're going slowly, because it takes really being able to, hold the, remembering what you started on and what you're shooting for. So I also advise people, listen to the refrigerator in the background. It's giving off a pitch that you can use to practice off of, to get to know your intervals, like to understand, that's a fourth from there, or that's a third. But you don't have to give it names even. You're really trying to figure out how to keep it in tune, play melodies if that's what your focus is. Are there other questions about like anything? Like, how old are you? Like, are you married? Or I am. Sorry. You have a question. Oops.
So what's the culture like?
So that's a good question. She was asking like, what's the reception of the instrument? And that I feel I love playing in New York because most of the people already know what it is when I show up there, and they've heard it many times. So they know already the many different ways that it can be used. And so they're there to listen to the music, and then they're also fascinated too because it looks totally crazy and strange. But in Vienna, it's just for the most part, there's still a lot of people who haven't seen it before. So it's like, whoa, and so we might not have conversations about, composition, or it'll just be like, what is that thing? How does it work? And it's okay because it's still, kind of newer there. And, there are a lot of places you go where it's like, what is that thing? And also in a lot of the classical world, you go to play like with classical musicians, it's like, you don't see these being studied in a conservatory. The positive side is there's nobody who can tell you and say, oh, you're doing it wrong. Like, there's no wrong way to do it, and there's no wrong way to do any other instrument either, actually, if you think about it. So there's an advantage to this instrument not really having some traditional history behind it. It's more like how you want to apply what you know so far to what you want to get out of it. And you had a question again back there, I saw. Yes, you.
You're talking about doing things that were outside of what you do piano. Do you know of any applications of the Theremin that like speaking in classical music?
I would so love to hear this instrument, playing the different tuning scales. You don't have to calibrate or change something about this instrument because it's like a voice. And I haven't yet heard, but I'm not like traveling the world, and finding out, but I'm not sure yet if there's anyone playing like Indian classical music, or, in Asia as well, you hear very, very different types of pitches, and like hopefully globalization doesn't kill this like wonderful, I call it like languages. It's another language, and I know I would have an accent because I would have a tendency to tune to the way I'm used to it. But with this instrument, you would be able to, it would lend itself very well to playing other scales. And how I even got interested in microtonal music was because I kept fucking up with this thing. Like I would have an idea and then, oh, and I know how it could go. And I thought, I'm going to compose it like to play this line and that line will go on there and I can build this counterpoint. And it's like, yeah, but then reality check, sometimes you step on this pedal and the pitch jumps, you know, and so many accidents and things were happening. But you have to start all over again when you make a mess up. And it's like, well, I can't do that when I'm performing. Like, start over, hang on, everybody, I messed up. And so then I started to listen to what was happening. It's like, hey, wait a minute. Oh, what about things like bells or church bell sounds? You know, because those are not like piano-tuned pitches that you hear that are very rich in three-dimensional feeling. So like I could build something very simply right now and put a little tiny tail of reverb on it. And I'll use more of like a bell tone with this. And you can hear all of these different pitches. And another trick I like to do is with my other looping pedal. So I'm just putting it in half speed or double speed. So it sounds very bell-like or chimey-like. And I'll play a tiny clip so you can hear like, after it had already been built up and progressed of like the, you know, microtonal things next to each other where it's like, you can make microtones and they're not painful or strange. It can sound very like relaxing, except for this terrible recording quality, but here's, so it's all of these sparkles. And that's not using a harmonizer or anything. It was just from building into using 3 line 6 looping pedals. I have a maximum of 14 seconds per pedal, or if it's in its like double or halftime mode, 7 seconds. But you could build independent loops in each individual one, or I would transfer what was in one of the pedals into the last one in the sequence and maybe play that back in its half speed, octave lower, double time version while the other ones are up on top and out of sync from each other. You then are able to play around with having these bits and pieces that bump into each other at different places as it progresses. And then there's also just ways to sound kind of like, sorry, that's very harsh. So it sounds very vocal, but there's like a really, so yeah, you're able to do very vocal-like things, but you're also able to go into like the total weirdo microtonal stuffs, and that's really fun for me, actually exploring that three-dimensional space of like, whoa, thickness. And then like there was something that I'd done once where it's like, oh, I love this one part of like a piece from Yo, who composed for the Ons Martineau some suite. And there was this section I heard where it's like, well, instead of having it, here's what the original part of that section sounds like. It sounds kind of like a theremin. It's the cousin to the theremin. And so then I thought, oh, I would so love to instead take certain harmonies and make a string section out of those piano chords. And so I did this with it instead. So I just felt like, oh, it'd be so nice to slow it down, hear those harmonies resonate more, but then to take certain pitches that were blocked together in the piano and like stringify them, so that and to make things resonate in a slightly different way to bring out the harmonies more. And so I found that, yeah, like that's my way of just playing around with making string sections for the fun of it. You have any questions? Because I have to. Oh, yes.
What was the song you played?
Which one?
Like one of the first songs you played.
Oh, one of the first songs I played.
Yeah, it was on YouTube.
Oh, the Scriabin one?
Yeah.
That's from. Yes. The first version of the Scriabin, that was from his 2 poems, but I might have closed that screen. It's not a number 1 or number 2. It is, I think it's like 32 or something like that. It's played by Heinrich Neuhaus. Oh, this is it. 2 poems, opus 32, and it's the first poem. This guy, he's really rocking it like Heinrich Neuhaus when he does the second poem. He's like so rock and roll with it and like so like with reckless abandon. I've never heard someone else play the second one with. Oh, the one before that. So the one before that, let's see, was it A being the Messiaen with those thick chords like tang, tang, chang, chang, or the Bartok? The dum, 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 dum. That one? Yep, that's the Bartok one, yeah. Like, it's called Nocturne or Notturno, and that's Bartok himself playing it, and you can find it on YouTube really easily. And it's from his Microcosmos, but if you search Bartok Notturno, Notturno, and that'll come up really easily. Yeah. Thanks for asking. Bartok's so wonderful. Do you have any other questions? You can ask me things as I pack my stuff because I have to run to a gig just down the street at the Stone at the New School in the Glass Box Theater, which starts at 8:30. I'm doing a duo incorporating my pedal setup with Eric Friedlander on cello, and we're improvising together. And I thought, oh, there's going to be like a real live amazing string player for me to then like challenge myself and like play it together with, and to pretend to be a string player or go totally out there weird, and yeah. And you have some announcement to make too,
No,
Stephanie?
I just like to say thank you for coming to us.
Oh.
Thank you to Amelia for helping
Yeah,
us out.
thank you, and thanks to Daphne for introducing me to everyone here. And